What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. This is our, what will not necessarily be so weekly, coming soon, series where we review the Magic stories. And this week we are here for the finale, finally. My God, it feels like it's been forever, but for good reasons. We are here for Chapter 20 of The Gathering Storm by Django Wexler.
Yeah.
My quick review at the top of this one is I am very conflicted. And we can talk about that in the full review itself. I think that this story is worth reading, but I think that when you combine it with where the story is leading, and what is being done to the characters that have existed prior to these stories, I struggle with it. But again, I think it was good writing. I think it's important to know that this story exists in the way that it does, because not counting the Wild Earth Quest, which we have not gotten to yet, but I've heard nothing but good things about, I think that this is the last good Magic story that we're going to get for some time. So I think it's worth reading the finale of it. But I will say I do not know that I had a quote-unquote good time reading Chapter 20 this week. That's me personally.
Okay. My quick review. It was disappointing. That's the short version.
Okay. All right. So that'll be good for now.
Get to
okay.
Things, yeah.
So what I will say is what we always say. We would love for you all to be with us, to join in on the conversation, but that probably means you will have to read the story first to be fully informed. We don't ever want to sit here and tell you this is how you should think.
Right.
We want to tell you what we think, and then we want to hear from all of you, especially if you have contrasting opinions, because we would love to hear, hey, you know what, totally agree with you guys, like that always feels good. Because it means that, you know, we are on the same wavelength and we're not totally out in left field somewhere,
right,
because we are similar enough and know each other well enough after all this time that it's possible that we would both have a similar opinion that doesn't take into account something glaring that we might have missed.
Right.
And so...
Right, and since we're reading the story together, it would make a lot of sense that if I missed something, he would also miss it, or if he missed something, I would also miss it.
Right.
Something that maybe you guys did not miss.
Right. That we may not have given as much weight as it should have had.
Right.
Or forgotten about, or what have you. Because the other thing is, some people may have waited until Chapter 20 came out and read this as a novel, and so read it all the way through, and so then you might be more keyed in to the deeper story points than us, who read Chapter 1 3 months ago. Right, a little more than 3 months ago, because these came out over the course of 20 weeks. And we're reading this on a delayed schedule, so, you know, even then it's possible that it's more than 3 months. We remember it well enough, we think, for ourselves, because we really enjoyed the stories, and it's something that, you know, we really focused on. But anything is possible, and so we would love to...
Kind of what we do every Wednesday.
So that's, again, that's why we would love to have you be informed viewers. Feel free to go read that story. Again, we give the quick review at the top so that if it's garbage, which it very infrequently is, but if it is garbage, we can say to you, hey, guess what? This was garbage. Don't waste your time. Just chill out here with us. And, you know, if once you hear our review, you're like, wow, it can't be that bad, and you want to go read it, you can feel free to do that. But even then, I think I would not be incorrect in saying that Amy may not even agree with that, and may say that it's always worth it to go read it and then come here so that you can be informed in in your discussions with us.
Right.
So.
Because I feel that we influence you too much if all you do is watch the review. And
I don't think it's just us. I think that's anyone. If you don't read a story and you go and listen to a review, and I'm not calling out anybody in particular here, this is just, I think, a fact in my own, or I'm sorry, that is just my opinion. I don't want to throw the word fact around like that. That's what we feel. is that if you don't read something and you go or watch something or whatever, and you go read a review and you let that color your opinion of it without forming your own opinions first, there are, I'm sure, movies that I've seen that people thought were terrible that I enjoyed, and vice versa. That I thought a movie was terrible and it was widely loved or considered a classic or what have you. So I'm aware of the fact that not every opinion that a critic has or a reviewer has or that I have necessarily matches up with anybody else for obvious reasons, because we're all people and we're all different.
Yeah.
That
I will say there are quite a number of things that I don't necessarily love that were very acclaimed. I won't get into that right now.
No, that's a different video for a different time, but
yes.
I agree with you. I do. And so, that all being said, if you would like to go read that story, please feel free to pause here. We would love for you to come back after you've read it, but you can search The Gathering Storm by Django Wexler online. There are many different places where you would be able to find it. And so, on to the full review itself. One thing that I really appreciated from the top of this one is that I think this is the first time, or at least the strongest instance, of a pure continuation from the prior chapter. Where the last sentence of the last chapter, if you read the first sentence of this chapter, there's technically a repeat of the fact that Lavinia and Veraska are the two that's standing there, but otherwise, if there wasn't a chapter break, it would have been a completely seamless transition between the end of the last chapter and the beginning of this one.
Actually picks up where it leaves off.
Like word for word in the sentence that it left off on. And I think that's the first time that it's blatantly done that in this way in this novel, right? In these chapters. That's not to say good, bad, indifferent. I think it makes sense for the final chapter for it to just be a continuation, but you had to break it up because they would have been, as one chapter, if it were 19 chapters, the whole novel, that 19th chapter would have been a slog to try to get through. So I appreciated that it broke it up in that way. It just did so in such a way that it was like slow. They're not slow. That's not the word I'm looking for at all. It cut it to the point where it was like, oh, okay, you didn't need this cut here, but because that chapter would have been super long if you didn't, it made sense for that cut to be there.
Kind of like this review. Super long.
Yeah, well, that's JaAR. Welcome to it. Thank you for joining us. And also, I would say on that I guess Lavinia and Veraska both being there was a nice enough cliffhanger. Whereas I think the only other logical stopping point would have been after the fight from this chapter and before we went to the prologue, so to speak, of back to Nicol Bolas and Tezzeret. Right? That would have been a better epilogue / final chapter, but it was very short. It was only a couple of paragraphs, and so to have actually done that as a full chapter would have been disingenuous because of the fact that they released them in the way that they did. If this were a full novel and that were the final chapter, I probably would have smiled and enjoyed myself. But if I waited a full week from chapter 19 to this, or chapter 20 to this, and it was just that epilogue portion, I would have felt really cheated that I waited a whole week for a paragraph and a half. So with the way that they released them, it made sense that it was that way. I'm going to... there was an issue that I had with the writing in this, which is surprising. That's not usually something that I have talked about, because I've praised Django Wexler all the way through on his writing ability. I think he's a very good writer. I enjoy his descriptions of places and etc. One thing that I thought I struggled with as a reader here, and I felt like because of that Django was struggling with as a writer, was Ral and Lavinia talking to one another. Now, I appreciated the realization that Lavinia was being controlled, because as I mentioned last time, I was like, oh, well, Lavinia's there with Veraska, so that's cool. Lavinia will turn on Veraska at some point and turn the tides and help everybody out in that way. No, Lavinia's being controlled by that thing that we've kind of been seeing throughout this novel that Bolas has been using to control other people. It's just that this time we know that they're being controlled because we didn't really... with Lavinia, we knew what she was like before, but with everybody else, we really didn't.
Right.
And so that was a good explanation. I appreciated that because I was ready. I was like, okay, what's Lavinia going to do with this situation? Is she going to just turn and stab Vraska immediately? Are they going to have to fight and pretend that they know each other or don't know each other and they aren't working together? But it worked out very nicely. The thing that I was frustrated by was I was super happy at first. Because when Rahl was talking to Lavinia, or we were hearing about Rahl confronting Lavinia, at a certain point, Rahl switched and started calling Lavinia Bolus because of the fact that she was being controlled. And I liked that a lot. And then it didn't follow that pattern anymore, and it went completely off the rails, and I was so confused and lost.
Right.
So for my thing that I write down passages for, that was what I did this week. He started, like I said, Rahl switched to calling Lavinia Bolus, and then at one point Rahl says to himself, and Bolus had to be getting closer. But at that point, he was talking about the real Nicol Bolas who was fighting Niv Mizzet, because the whole point in trying to take out Lavinia and Vraska quickly was that he wanted to do that because he knew that Niv couldn't hold off Bolus forever, and Bolus was going to show up. So he went from calling Lavinia Bolus to talking about the real Bolus outside, which is step one of being confusing. I'm not done. Next...
I didn't find that part confusing.
Well, in the next line, it says, Rahl glanced at the security keyboard, but Lavinia followed his gaze and shook his head. So, is that just a typo that you used the his there, referring to his head? Or is it because you called her Lavinia, but you were calling her Bolus, so you use the male pronoun his to refer to Lavinia again, or is it just
Actually,
a typo?
it would make more sense if they had called the person Bolus and said her head. Because the head is Lavinia's head.
Correct.
But the personality is Bolus.
Correct. Plus, it's confusing because the article, it's followed his gaze, but his gaze is Rahl's gaze, and then his head is Lavinia's head, / Bolus's head. So that was super confusing. And I genuinely think it was just a typo and it was missed. That it was supposed to say her head because they were referencing her as Lavinia at that point, not as Bolus. But because of the fact that Rahl had been calling Lavinia Bolus, it was super confusing to me at that in that sentence.
Yeah, because maybe if it had been something that Rahl said, then maybe it would make sense for him to refer to it as his.
Right.
But because the narrator was saying it, it needed to have the correct pronoun for Lavinia at that point.
Yeah. And then in the next paragraph, it referred to Lavinia again, and it said she raised her blade. So now you're back to the female pronoun and referring to her as Lavinia, and it kind of dropped calling her Bolus. So I was very confused. Because at first I was super happy. I was like, that's cool. You've switched now from calling her Lavinia to calling her Bolus, but it was so inconsistent that it was just so confusing. And again, as I've talked about in past weeks, it took me out of the story because now I was focused on the writing, the grammatical structure of it.
The editing.
Right. As opposed to...
the lack of editing.
Right. As opposed to actually being immersed in the story and visualizing everything that was happening. So that's a gripe that I would think if it were something small, like if it were just calling Lavinia Bolus and then referring to the outside Bolus, and that was the only thing that I was talking about here, I would agree that would be a little nitpicky. But I think because it then went into the pronoun mistake, I'm going to say it's a mistake because that's what I think it is. I don't think that it would have made sense calling her Lavinia but then using his because it's Bolus. That doesn't make sense to me. So I think it was just a typo, but then you go back to referring to Lavinia with female pronouns. So that was a lot for me. I was pretty confused by
Yeah, it was a little too all over the place.
Yes.
Just pick a way that you're going to do it and stick to it.
Right. I've talked a lot, Amy, so why don't you take over something that you had mentioned to me while we were reading, very shortly after we started reading this chapter, in fact. I will chime in with my thoughts of other people as well, but you wanted to talk about Bolus's characterization, and at the time that you mentioned it, it was as he was talking through Lavinia, essentially.
Right. Okay. I really like the Django Wexler stories, and I think the writing is good, but the characterization isn't. I think, but again, how much of that is bad writing, and how much of it is a lack of information, and how much of that is retconning, and how much of that is trying to lead up to something that's already happened, and not having the time and energy to flesh anything out. There's so many reasons why it is or could be poor, but regardless, it's poor. I don't think that there was any moment in this story where we heard dialogue from Bolus where I sat there and said, yeah, no, that sounds just like Bolus.
That's fair.
It was just kind of generic bad guy.
Villainy stuff, yeah.
Bolus is clever. Bolus is conniving. Bolus is manipulating. And we didn't really see any of that. It was all just kind of, well, I'm going to mind control, and, well, ha ha ha, and, well, I'm going to hurt you and the people you love. It's just so generic bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
Cliched, etc. It didn't say Bolus to me at all. At all.
I will say, this is super devil's advocate. I think the time when Bolus was with that last sentence in the book, like the last sentence of the chapter of the novel, etc., was where he asked Tezzeret for the report, and Tezzeret says yes, they defeated, Ral defeated Lavinia and Veraska and got to the beacon and turned it on, and Bolus goes, good, then everything's going according to plan. Because again, through reading the novel, if you didn't know what was coming next, or you didn't remember back to the beginning where Bolus put that in Niv's brain, that was the moment where Bolus's third or fourth contingency plan still fell into place, but he put forth that blockade of those two women to stop or make Ral think that he wasn't supposed to do that, even though he was. I don't know. I
still think it's really cliche and stupid and useless because we already knew it.
Well, and where do I talk about that later? Oh, the Veraska at the end, right? We've already read the War of the Spark novel, where Veraska appears eventually. It takes her a while, but she gets there towards the latter, third of the novel, and so at the end of this, where they make the comment that Ral unleashes the electricity, and there's a black streak on the ground, and that's all that's left of where Veraska was standing, and then
which doesn't make sense.
Well, again, she almost certainly planeswalked away.
Yeah.
And so the lightning streak was the black streak that was left on the ground. It just burned the ground, and she was gone. Tezzeret mentions to Bolus that she is nowhere to be found, or her fate is uncertain, or something to that effect. And that makes sense to me, but if this were the first novel that I was reading and I hadn't read Greg Weisman's already, I would probably be a lot more intrigued and curious as to where Veraska had gone, because, or what, if she had died or gone somewhere or whatever, and what happened to her.
Or if there was any meaning to it at all.
But I already know, because we read it. So that part would have been a great way to then appropriately follow up, because in the emails that we received, when we received these, immediately after, right, when it said the end at the bottom, it said, but the story's not over yet. You can buy Greg Weisman's book, you can buy Forsaken. And those two links were down at the bottom. That's very smart.
Yes,
and
finally.
And before War of the Spark Ravnica came out, this one, we made a video because we were very frustrated by the fact that when the cards for War of the Spark were being spoiled, there were beautiful videos made by Wedge of the Mana Source that talked about story and lore and showed off, I think, 3 or 4 different cards, like the biggest cards from the end of War of the Spark, which is Liliana kind of betraying herself, betraying Bolas, and then like being killed, Gideon stepping in and sacrificing himself instead, and then Gideon's heartwarming redemption with his irregulars in the afterlife. And those were amazing. And
right.
they had a ton of views, tons of people saying, wow, I haven't followed the stories, but this was a great synopsis. It wasn't perfect. We nitpicked a couple of things, and they were nitpicks, but my biggest concern with it was that when Wedge was asked to do those videos, Wizards, because nothing against Wedge, Wizards didn't then turn that into letting people know, hey, do you want to read about this that you loved so much by watching this? There's a book. Go buy the book.
Right.
They didn't tell a single person about it, and it was very frustrating.
Right. There was no marketing whatsoever. Any bit of marketing that was done was seemingly kind of random or at the wrong time.
Well, or was done by the publisher and or third parties that Wizards had been able to contract with so that
right.
they would be the company to break the article or the story so that they could be retweeted by other people and so that they would hopefully, I guess, get outside people who'd never read Magic Story before interested in it.
Weird, convoluted way do what they thought they wanted.
Yeah, like random company X that has never been associated with Wizards of the Coast ever before.
Yeah.
And from the look of it, like, why would they ever again? But
right.
whatever, maybe they know something that I don't. But yeah, so that in and of itself was frustrating. So that's why I was super happy that at the end of this, where the story ended and there were still questions, right? Tezzeret saying this plane has no chance. Veraska is missing. Those are the moments where you're like, I want to know what happens next.
Right.
And conveniently, here's how you find out what happens next. Go read these books. Go buy them. Here's the link. Right there for you. That is intelligent, brilliant marketing.
It's not really brilliant. It's pretty basic.
It's basic, but in comparison to how it's been, it's the best we've seen.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that, again, it's, 6 months too late?
Right.
If not longer than 6 months too late?
Right. So
it's
realistically, it's not good marketing at all.
So, and again, that's because it was released out of order. If it were released in order, this would have been brilliant, I think. I think it would have, because you had 20 weeks for content creators. I'm not even necessarily going to talk about ourselves here. Other content creators who have either larger followings or are able to, I don't know, they have more guests, hosts and stuff. They would be able to tout the story for weeks, leading up and saying, this is good, go read it. And so they would read it maybe when chapter 3 comes out. They've heard it for the past 2 or 3 weeks. They go back, they start at chapter 1, they read it all the way through, they get to chapter 20. Now they're following along with their favorite podcaster or video producer, content producer or whatever. And now they're going, I need to go read this book now. And they buy the book. Now, some people, many people maybe, would tell you that they didn't think the book was a good purchase or a good use of their money, but they would have purchased it.
Right.
And then they would have found out, and so maybe Forsaken wouldn't have sold as well, which, from what we've heard, may be a positive. But we haven't gotten there yet.
Yep.
We reserve judgment. We've heard things, but that's not our official review. It's just what we've heard. And it would have been a way for that book to have sold a lot more copies, in my opinion, of course, because that's kind of the ideal world, and what you would expect is that you have a very good story. It's told over 20 weeks, so you get people to be hyped about it, and then you get people to want to read the next one to find out what happens next. And then if they read the next one and enjoy it, then they'd be willing to read a third. If they read the second one and didn't enjoy it, sure, like I said, Forsaken sales might have faltered for that, but this book would have probably done a lot better, and we would not have had to hear, and we haven't heard it since the book, but we've heard it prior, that Vorthos fans don't spend money, and that's enough of a reason to want to move away from free web fiction, because, you know, there aren't a lot of people that read the web fiction, and et cetera, whatever the sad excuse is for why you want to make novels to make more money, even though novels didn't work and haven't worked. So, again, I've gone off on another tangent, but I can tie it back. So Vraska, her fate being uncertain is a good thing for people wanting to read the next story, but it's also not. Because Vraska in this story isn't Vraska. She's just not. The same way that Amy wasn't happy with Bolus. I'll get on my soapbox again, because I've done it many times. And so if you've watched many JaARs, I'll try to keep it brief and not repeat a bunch of stuff. But I will talk about this story, this chapter in particular, with regard to Vraska. Because Vraska says that she's fighting on Bolus's side. This is a paraphrase. This is not written word for word. But she's fighting for Bolus because she feels that the only way to save the Golgari at all, the only chance that the Golgari have with Bolus coming to Ravnica, is to pledge loyalty to the winning side. And that she's aware of the fact that Bolus will likely just kill her when she becomes of no use to him anymore, but it's still the best chance that the Golgari have for her to either swear allegiance to Bolus or just work for him in general or whatever. That is stupid.
Yep.
That's very stupid. And for someone who is a naive protagonist, that would be fair and would make sense.
Maybe.
But the Vraska, well, because, you know, if it's like Teo, right? Teo's a kid and doesn't get it. So if Teo were able to be manipulated to believe that...
He doesn't know what's going on.
Right, well, but he's also an inexperienced mage in general. Like, he gained abilities, or his abilities grew as his spark matured and as he traveled through Ravnica in this story. But if he were manipulated by Bolus in that way, I would think that would make a lot more sense than Vraska being manipulated in that way. Vraska is a leader. Vraska is a queen. Vraska is a captain. Vraska is if she didn't, you would have. So, and you know you would have. But Vraska is an assassin, a trained assassin. She's smart enough to, and they told us that in this story. She's smart enough to have been able to do all those things. Right. She had to be street smart. We already know, thanks to Alison Lurs' story about Mazarek from Commander from years ago, that she's smarter than that as well.
Right.
She's the woman who likes sitting and sipping tea while reading books. She is an intelligent character. But not in this. Well, it's the only way, so I'm going to side with him and try to kill anyone that I could have teamed up with to stop this guy, who's almost certainly going to kill me anyway.
Right. And the thing is, she had time to mull things over and try to come up with a better idea.
But again, they made her...
She knew what was happening ahead of time.
Yeah, but they made her so...
watered down?
Well, so depressed over Jace not being there to save the day, because she's now a damsel in distress, I guess, even though when Jace showed up... Yeah, when Jace showed up on Ixalan and she saw him and he had no memories, she was just going to kill him outright. She didn't need him to save her at all, because she was a captain. Whatever, man. And then to follow it up with Mazarek. Again, somebody who should have been an amazing character in this story as a friend of Vraska going way back. And again, somebody else who we talked in that review of Allison's story about how interesting it was to have a crawl necromancer, a giant bug person that brings people from the dead and controls the dead. Like probably one of the most disgusting things that you could think of. A living insect who recycles corpses for his own benefit. And a Gorgon assassin who turns people to stone, who has tentacles for hair, all of these different things. And yet in that story, the two of them were sitting down, sipping tea, and discussing having intelligent conversations with one another.
About politics.
About anything.
Right.
Politics, history, current events on Ravnica. All of that is perfect. It's so well done because it's not what's expected. It's so anti that trope that Amy was talking about, all the cliches from this story. It's so against that because it's what many people consider to be gross characters doing sophisticated things. And then you come to this story, and Mazarek is a backstabber who gets killed by the comic relief.
Right.
Sure. Which also doesn't make any goddamn sense.
Nope.
Mazarek goes out like a chump, betrayed by Storev. Okay, maybe, fine. To Brutus, courtesy of Hekara, and then this is presumably after Hekara has died, but Brutus, in killing Mazarek, says that Hekara says that Vraska sends her regards?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
What?
And why is the character's name Brutus? Like, there should be some meaning to that then. Brutus was Caesar's most important confidant. So if a character's going to be named Brutus and going to be killing somebody, that person that they're killing better be damn important.
Well,
and they better have quite a close relationship that would make it really, really hurtful that they're all of a sudden betraying them.
That's a very good point. I hadn't really thought of
That makes no goddamn sense.
It doesn't.
Oh, here's Brutus to kill the ever-important Mazakath or whatever. Mazarek. Whatever.
Mazakath.
That they already wrote out of the story, basically.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
No. But I've been talking about Vraska and Mazarek for weeks now. And that was the other thing when the situation came out with Chandra and Nissa from Forsaken. I wrote on Twitter, I was like, that's why people should watch JaAR more, because we've been talking about this for weeks.
Right.
That they're just retconning all of this stuff, and again, we haven't read it, so it may, I'm sure it's not, because I trust the people who've been talking about it enough that I know that they read the story.
Right.
So I know that it's not out of context, because that would not be beneficial to their cause to take it out of context in that way and then complain about it.
That doesn't mean they won't.
Fair, but they are. I choose currently to not believe that they're doing it.
Right.
Stay tuned for our full review in a few weeks when we will be able to tell you if we think that passage that's being passed around the internet is taken out of context or not. But as I said, I am in no way thinking that it was. I think that is, I mean, especially with the way that it was written, I don't know how that could be in context and be better than just reading it on its own. Unless it's, she has a dream and she says this in her dream and then she wakes up and she goes, wow, that was weird. That's not me at all.
Anyway.
So yeah, between Bolus's characterization being kind of generic villainy trope, Vraska's characterization being done in any way whatsoever to make her not trusting of Jace and move her away from that and ruin, I think, her character. Yeah. Because again, she was being positioned, with maybe Chandra as well, as being the main female protagonist in these stories alongside Jace. But then it shifted to Liliana. Again, we've given our reasoning as to why we believe that's the case.
Yeah.
Different colored tentacle-headed woman or attractive woman that you can put in a revealing dress. Which would you like to try to sell your fantasy product? Again,
It's not just that. I mean, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with everybody online and their reviews of the book as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to think about Nick Kelman being the type of person that Nick Kelman is, it would make perfect sense for him to want not only a sexy person to be the figurehead, but also someone who is like him. Someone who is... Oh, so many adjectives.
I don't want to cut you off until you're done.
Someone who is a little more morally ambiguous than you might want them to be.
That is legitimately the kindest way you could have put that.
Thank you.
Props. I wouldn't say I was worried because I trust you and you are allowed.
Is very hot.
You're allowed to say whatever you'd like. This is our show for that reason, but that is a very, very controlled and appropriate way of putting that.
Well, and I will say, now that I've said that, I will say that there are probably plenty of people who could say the same about Veraska, right? She murders lots of people and builds a throne out of them. But
that's still in this story where her characterization is being bastardized.
Well,
I don't think that the Veraska that leaves Ixalan at the end of Ravels of Ixalan is the Veraska that we have in this story or in War of the Spark.
Okay.
I just don't. And unfortunately, there are conflicting opinions online as to whether or not we can consider any or all of these Ravnica-based stories to be canon or not. I genuinely, at this point, since I have not read Forsaken yet, I genuinely do not have an opinion yet. If it is something that I feel is warranted to bring up during our review of Forsaken, I will definitely feel free to do so. But as of right now, I don't think it's appropriate for me to say one way or the other because I haven't read the final third piece.
Regardless, everything is canon until it's retconned.
Correct.
What we had before was canon, and now it is not because it is being retconned.
Right.
So maybe this will be retconned and we'll have a new canon again.
Also, I will say...
But for now, it is what it is.
I will say, and this is something that's bothered me a lot, and I don't see a lot of people talking about it, but it's something that I wanted to bring up. Amy brought up Nick Kelman's name. I would not have said his name, but I don't think you're wrong in saying it. But I will say that, to me, it's very purposeful that we as a community cannot access Nick Kelman.
Oh, yeah.
Ever. Whereas previously, when you had the Alison Lourses of the world, the Kelly Diggses of the world, the Michael E. Chows, the James Wyatts, the Mel Lees, the all these different people, you could tweet at them. Now, they could, I wouldn't say ignore.
Like Kimberly Cryness.
Fair. But I wouldn't say they would ignore you, but if they're like inundated, they might just not have the time or ability to answer.
Well, yeah, of course. That's life.
But they were accessible.
Yeah.
Nick Kelman is not in any way accessible, and in fact, I would say there are a large number of Wizards of the Coast staff, #WotC staff, that are available to speak with through Twitter. And it's super obvious that no one on the story team is. Specifically Nick Kelman as the head of story, possibly story and development. I don't know his title. Frankly, nor do I care, because...
You shouldn't have it.
But
regardless.
but that's my point, is that all of these things that we're saying about him, we are right until we're proven wrong. I don't know that that's even a right way to say it. That seems really entitled. Mm-hmm. We feel that we are right until we are shown evidence to the contrary.
And
that's a better way of saying it, I
think.
think.
The reason is because we've been shown so much evidence proving that. because
it hasn't been refuted or discussed in any way to the contrary.
Right.
In any way. From either the company that he works for, where people are super up in arms at this point against them and their decision making.
Right.
Or from he himself, who, again, from the moment that he joined the company, was conspicuously not available through social media. Now, I will say, I do not think it is a requirement that an employee of Wizards of the Coast also be available through social media. They have a right to separate their personal life from their work life. They're not taking these jobs to become celebrities.
Right.
But it would still be a good thing or a nice thing to be able to ask questions, like we would be able to of a Mark Rosewater or the James Wyatts of the world or the Doug Byers or etc.
Yeah. Or at the very least, if we can't get in touch with Nick Kelman himself, ask the company these questions.
Right, the community
and have them
managers
actually be addressed.
Yeah, the community managers, etc. And so as of the time of the recording, if you haven't gotten it yet, there has not been any discussion whatsoever about the second novel, Forsaken, despite the fact that it's been out for about a week now. And
wow. And we still haven't gotten ours.
With lots of frustration from people. We will get ours and we will read it, don't you worry.
Yeah, I checked Amazon. It came up with a thing that said that it was in progress.
Okay. Fair enough. Regardless, that's neither here nor there. We would not, whether we had gotten it last week or this week, we would not have been able to read it by next week, so right. That's irrelevant. Don't worry, we will have something up next week. For those of you that celebrate it, it will be Thanksgiving.
Yes.
But yeah, we will have something up next week, don't you worry. So that is probably going to be the end. What I will say is we will try to tell you in the videos in the coming weeks when our next JaAR will be, but I can't promise anything because we have to see what time we have to read the story.
Right.
Because especially with how problematic it appears to be through other people's eyes and opinions, we want to take our damn sweet time with it to make sure that we give it any opportunity to be good.
Right.
Seriously.
Analyze it and analyze it again.
Right. And if it's not good, you'll hear from us that it's not good. Right. We're not afraid to give bad reviews.
As you know.
Right. But I want to give it its due, and I don't want to jump on the train of everybody talking about it so that we can get the clicks and the views. I want to actually read the story, I want to be able to analyze the story, and I want to come here and explain, if it's not good, why we think it's not good.
Right.
Including, but not limited to, any situations with Chandra and Nissa and any retcons that are seemingly going on.
Right.
Because the other thing is that the thing that got talked about after that was then people talking about Liliana and what's been going on with her, but that took a long time to get to because of the Chandra and Nissa stuff. So I want to get into every single thing because it's important.
Yeah.
Because as Amy said, it's canon until it's retconned. So if we go to Zendikar, or Theros, I guess is the next stop. If we go to Theros and we get another story, and it's going to include anybody besides Elspeth that was involved in War of the Spark, we need to know what is going on with them so that we can determine if they're sticking to characterization on certain characters or moving in a blatantly different direction.
Right, which, I mean, if history is any indication, it's going to be blatantly another direction yet again because it's
Current
a different
history.
right because it's
Current history.
It's a different direction every single time. I feel like.
Yeah. So
even if it's only slight, it's still slightly different.
I will say, as we close out, unless you have anything else.
I don't know at this point. I'm sure I did about the actual story, but
oh, okay.
We're so far from that at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, because it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, and I've said this in the past, which is unfortunate that I've had to say it now more than once, that these stories, the Gathering Storm chapters that were released, were from a great author. They were very well written, and I really enjoyed my time reading these. I know that Django Wexler tends to retweet us when we talk about his work. If for some reason, Django, you're watching and you've watched this long into this, despite the fact that we've talked around and around about a million other things,
yeah,
thank you.
Yes.
I'm sure we will tweet that at you when we tweet this episode out as well, but thank you. And the thank yous are in order, and I think they are very warranted because you worked very hard.
Yes.
In what is likely a no-win situation.
Right.
Because
honestly, I mean,
I love, though, I will say I loved when this finale came out, right? Like I said, we're a couple weeks behind on purpose. When this finale came out, I loved seeing tweets from people or seeing Django retweet people who said, you know, thank you so much for the Ravnica stories. We loved them. Your writing was great. I can't wait to go look at your other stuff. Bravo to those people. Because that's what you need to do. I shouldn't say need. That's what you should want to do following an author writing something for Magic the Gathering. You should want to...
one of the main intents that Wizards had.
Arguably.
When deciding to scrap a story team and go with, you know, outside writers.
Sure. That's the reason.
Pretend.
That's the reason.
One of the
right.
reasons.
That's the reason they gave, as opposed to just not wanting to pay benefits to people. Because you still have to pay them, but you sure as hell don't have to pay them benefits because they're contractors. And you know that's worked out super well for the artists. Not a single problem with any of those. No question. I will say, I guess with that being said, I also want to somewhat apologize. Because it's very easy to join on the bandwagon and crap all over the mishandling of these stories. And in certain cases, it's funny. Because you...
Not at this point.
Because you have to laugh. Otherwise...
You cry?
Yeah, well, because otherwise, what have you been doing? You've been reading stories and committing to these characters that are now being taken away, in a sense, from you. And that's sad. And I know that there are a lot of very vocal fans out there who are just asking for something. Right. They're not necessarily doing it in the nicest way ever. They're not necessarily doing it in not the nicest way ever. It depends on the person. Each individual person is doing this differently. I am worried about where the story is going in the future, but I have to be hopeful that we will get something better than what we've been getting recently, because I think that we deserve it.
Yeah.
And I don't say...
At this point, it's almost hard to believe that we do.
And I don't say we, meaning Amy and I. I don't say we, meaning Amy and I and only our viewers. I mean the Vorthos community. I do. Because recently it feels like we're trying to be pushed out. A lot of prominent...
On purpose.
Right. A lot of prominent content creators in the Vorthos community have been saying that they are super burnt out by all of this nonsense. Is this the community for them anymore? And it seems like it's not, because the person who is in charge doesn't care enough to keep it up.
Or the multiple people who are in charge.
And which at that point you can just say the company.
Yeah.
You have to say the company, because you don't have any answers to any questions.
Right.
So it has to be directed at the company itself, because there's no other answer. So what I will say is, for now, we are here. Like I said, we're going to have to take some time off, but that has nothing to do with the quality of the stories or our like being burned out as content creators or anything to that effect. It solely has to do with the fact that we want to give time to the story. We want to read it. We want to give it time, and we want to be able to come to all of you with the answers and our opinions and share them with all of you so that you can then share yours with us.
Right, and we want our opinions to be educated opinions. We want to have as much information as possible.
Yeah. Like I
so
said,
that we can come to conclusions that aren't just conclusions that we've jumped to. They're conclusions that we really developed.
right, or that we've read online from other people, and then we've made a video to consolidate because we have the channel and we can do that. That's not our thing.
That's not what we do.
And we're not here for clicks. We're here for discussion. And we're here to learn just as much as we hope that we're here to impart some thoughts and some other ideas in all of your minds as well. Because we'd love to learn from you, and we hope that you learn from us. Sticking with things in this community, with us, with other Vorthos fans and content creators around these stories and into the future stories of Magic the Gathering, is how we have to continue to show off our
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
It's super important. Super important. And we've said it long before any of this happened, and we will keep saying it long after. So, thank you all so very much for joining us this week, and for any and all of the Gathering Storm stories that you joined us for, because these were a joy. I enjoyed reading these stories, these chapters. It's unfortunate that it ended the way it did, but I hope to not have that taint my experience with them, because it was a good story. I think that I would have liked in this review to have been able to pinpoint better a lot of the things that were properly called back to at the end.
Okay.
And shouted out and closed with a ribbon. But I didn't really write any of them down, because it was just like a little thing right like here and there where I was like, oh, okay, yes, I kind of remember that. Yeah, I kind of remember that too. But again, it was coupled with the Veraska situation, the Mazarek situation, the Bolus situation. And so that's why I said I didn't have as much fun reading this particular chapter, because it kind of piled all that stuff on at the end, which was unfortunate. But if you have not seen our other reviews of these stories, I encourage you to go watch them, because they were very good, I think.
If you haven't read them, I encourage you to read them.
That's what I meant.
If only for the sake of giving yourself a brief moment of getting to read some good stories before, the next quite possibly bad story.
Right.
But we
Likely,
don't know.
but not certain. Yeah. And we will come back to you as soon as we can with that. But again, that doesn't mean that we're going away on this channel. It just means that JaAR is taking a quick break, because as we've said, we are not going to throw in useless JARs in between just because we've set ourselves out to have weekly JARs. We have lots of other content that we can put out on this channel. And between our 3 channels, we put out definitively 4 videos a week, no question at this point. Something crazy happening, sure, maybe, but since we've launched our second channel, we've been putting out 4 videos a week. And so we encourage you to check out all of those channels. Everything that you need to know is down in the description. All our socials, all of our channels, down in the description. That's what it's for. That's this channel, Geek for All. which covers Magic the Gathering, our other channel, Video Games for All, for video games, and Amy's Gluten Free for All channel. All of those links, as I said down in the description, they'll be popping up on the screen as well. Yes. But if you're interested, just go there. You can subscribe to any and all of those. That helps us out immensely.
Yes.
You all know how YouTube works. There's liking, there's commenting, subscribing, ringing bells, and doing all those fun things. Any and all of those help us out greatly. But also with the comment section, we would love to hear from you. Yes. Because, and I'm sure your fellow Vorthos fans would love to hear from you as well. So,
yeah.
For now, this was a long one, but I think it was worth it. For now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.